Bienvenue à la réunion numéro.
I call this meeting to order. Welcome to meeting number 41 of the Standing Committee on Fisheries and Oceans.
Ancestral and unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. Pursuant to Standing Order 108 and the motion adopted on Wednesday, April the 22nd, 2026, the committee is meeting to begin its study on the publication of a report on 4 wind energy areas in the offshore of Nova Scotia. This meeting is taking place in a hybrid format, pursuant to standing orders and pursuant to routine motions. I would like to advise the committee members that all witnesses virtually today have successfully completed their testing. I would like to remind participants of the following points. This is all housekeeping, guys. Please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking. For those in video conference, please click on the microphone icon to ensure that you're able to get your interpretation and done, and unmute yourself when you're not speaking. At the bottom of your screen, you will see that global-looking icon that will tell you the appropriate channel for interpretation, either floor, English, or French. And I want to remind witnesses that committee members will ask you questions in French or English. So if you need interpretation, I'd ask you to put on your microphones right now or your earpieces so that you can hear that. All comments should be made through the chair. And members, if you wish to speak in the room, put up your hands, and the clerk and I would try to manipulate what we think is the right order of things. I want to remove the word manipulate. I would now like to recommend our witnesses. From the Department of Fisheries and Oceans, we have Bernard Vigneux, Director General, Ecosystem Science Directorate, Wendy Williams, Regional Director, Aquatic Systems, Maritime Region. She's by video conference, and Luc Gaulton, Director, Oceans and Aquaculture Management, by video conference. I will start with the opening statement for whichever one of you are doing it for 5 minutes, please. And I'll give you a 1 minute and then a 30-second literal shout out, so you can know if your time is up and adjust your speaking notes accordingly. Thank you. So please, Mr. Vigneux, are you speaking?
Yes,
for 5 minutes,
Thank
please.
you, Madam Chair. So, bonjour, good afternoon, committee chair, vice chairs, and members. I first acknowledge that I'm speaking with you on unceded Anishinaabe Algonquin territory. The people of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation have lived on this territory for millennia. Their culture and presence have nurtured and continue to nurture this land. I express my honor for the people and the land of the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation. I also express my honor for all First Nation, Inuit, and Métis people and their valuable past and present contribution to this land. My name is Bernard Vigneux, and I'm the Director General of Ecosystem Science at Fisheries and Ocean Canada. My colleagues and I appreciate the opportunity to appear before this committee on behalf of the department. I'm accompanied today by Mrs. Wendy Williams, Regional Director of Aquatic Ecosystem, Fisheries and Ocean Canada Maritime Region. In addition to marine planning and conservation, she's also responsible for the Fish and Fish Habitat Protection Program and the Species at Risk Management Division. Mr. Luc Gaulton, Director of Ocean and Aquaculture Management, Fisheries Management in Ocean Canada Maritime Region, is also responsible for marine planning and conservation in the Maritime Region. Fisheries and Ocean is responsible for managing Canada's fisheries, protecting aquatic ecosystem, and ensuring the sustainable use of marine resources. We publish scientific information, research results, and conclusions in support of open science. On December 18, 2025, the FOPO published a Canadian manuscript report of fisheries and aquatic science entitled 4 Wind Energy Area in the Offshore of Nova Scotia, a description of the primary marine ecosystem features, significant and protected area, at-risk and depleted species, fish and fisheries, science surveys, and other human uses that may occur in and around the French Bank, Middle Bank, Sable Island Bank, and the Sydney Bight areas. I'll now turn to French. Ce rapport a été publié en appui à l'appel de renseignement de la Régie Canada-Nouvelle-Écosse de l'énergie extracôtière. qui a pris fin le 13 janvier 2026. Cet appel de renseignement invitait les groupes autochtones et les détenteurs de droits, le secteur de la pêche, l'industrie, le gouvernement, le public et les autres intervenants à fournir des commentaires sur divers sujets, notamment les zones d'énergie éolienne envisagées et l'emplacement des parcelles potentielles dans ces zones.
Mr. Vigneault, we're not getting translation, so if you could just hold for a second, I'll stop the clock so we don't take your time.
Testing, testing.
You're getting it now? No, but we're not getting it.
Testing, testing.
Okay.
Testing, testing. The report was published in support of the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Energy Regulators Call for Information, which closed on January 13th, 2026. The call for information invited Indigenous groups and rights holders. This is the interpreter. I'm speaking on the English channel.
Is everyone hearing the interpreter? Yes? Does anybody want Mr. Vigneault to start again? At the beginning?
Of the French portion.
Can you begin your French version, please, Mr. Vigneault? We'll go back, give you what, an extra, how many seconds did we lose? A minute? Give him an extra minute. Yeah. Okay.
Thank
Go
you,
ahead.
Madam Chair. Ce rapport a été publié en appui à l'appel de renseignement.
This report was published in support of the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Energy Regulators Call for Information, which closed on January 13th, 2026. The call for information invited Indigenous groups and rights holders, the fishing sector, industry, government, the public, and other stakeholders to provide feedback on a variety of topics, including the wind energy areas being considered and the location of potential parcels within these wind energy areas. The DFO report provides a high-level description of the marine ecosystem and human uses that may occur in or near each of the 4 designated wind energy areas in the offshore of Nova Scotia. The report draws from DFO published literature, DFO data holdings such as fishery landings and species detections data, and DFO mapping products. The report describes primary marine ecosystem features, significant and protected areas, at-risk and depleted species, fish and fisheries, science surveys, and other human uses to inform regulatory decision makers, industry, and members of the public. The report does not assess the wind energy area sites for offshore wind energy suitability. It also does not evaluate the risk of offshore wind energy development on the marine ecosystem, marine species, or human uses in each area. It may inform the scope of future risk assessments, but additional detail and analyses would be needed to inform project-specific assessments. Fisheries and Oceans Canada is committed to sustainably managing Canada's fisheries and oceans for the long-term benefit of all Canadians, while also advising and informing upon new opportunities within Canada's ocean economy. We recognize the essential role that science information and advice play in achieving these goals. Thank you for your attention. We will now welcome your questions.
Mr. Vigneault, and we will now go to the question and answer session, which will start with 6 minutes. And the 6 minutes, as you well know, includes both the question and the answer. So I will begin with the Conservatives. Mr. Small, for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question to Mr. Vigneault, and welcome, Monsieur Vigneault and the officials to this meeting. Mr. Vigneault, how much groundfish migrated through? It's open. Oh, okay. Sorry. Yeah, I know. I know. Uh, thank you, Chair. Mr. Vigneault, how much groundfish migrated through the Scotian Shelf and was harvested in the Scotian Shelf before the collapse of the 1990s annually? Do you have that figure?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. I don't have that figure. I can tell you that the report was a snapshot in time, and I think, as you're alluding to, didn't include the periods prior to the last.
No, it absolutely. So in fact, the historical significance of the areas in which offshore wind is being planned on the banks off the eastern shore and off Cape Breton was not addressed in the documents. Do you think, with the development of offshore wind on those banks, that there's ever a possibility of a recovery of the groundfish fishery, as has happened with the northern cod in Newfoundland and Labrador?
Thank you for the question, Madam
Chair. Point of order.
It is a
Chair,
possibility.
point of order.
Yes, Mr. Morrissey.
The production order that was moved and adopted by this committee was very specific. It related to the report that was done. And this committee has a lot of important work to do. We agreed to review this for 2 hours, so it's not relevant. It should stick to the subject matter that was adopted by the committee, which was the production of this report.
Thank you. That is a point of order. Mr. Arnold?
Counter to Mr. Morrissey's argument, I believe the points Mr. Small are making very relevant as to what is in the report, what's missing from the report, what should have been in the report. So I think it's very relevant, the question.
Chair, I disagree with Mr. Arnold. It was specific. The motion that was adopted by this committee, which was a production order for the report. In fact, the motion put forward by Mr. Small asking for this report has been public since online since the fall of 2025. And I would ask for clarification, Mr. Chair, Madam Chair, on the current subject before the committee and the relevancy of the questioning that is occurring.
Well, before I rule on whether that is a point of order or not, or whether it is acceptable that Mr. Small's questions are within the scope of the report, Mr. Arnold, would you like to say why you think his questions are focused on the scope of the report? Because if I may remind everyone, the motion said that in fact members of the committee focus on the scope of the meeting that would be on the report.
But the scope of the meeting on the report,
Yes?
I think it's very relevant that we point out what was missing in the report, what work had not been done by the department to provide a report that this government would potentially be making recommendations or decisions upon. If there are shortcomings in what has been included in the report, that's very relevant to the report itself, because it is lacking. That is why I consider this very relevant.
Mr. Morrissey, Mr. Arnold is making the point that this is in fact relevant because focusing on the report focuses on not only what's there but what isn't there.
Madam Chair, it is your call, but the motion was clear. It was a production order related to the report, specific to the report. Getting into what may or may not, quite frankly, is a whole different debate, which should have been encompassed in a motion identifying that, Madam Chair.
Mr. Duchesne?
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Je veux dire que...
Thank you, Madam Chair. I want to say that when we study a report, it seems obvious that we need to encompass who gave the mandate, the context of the report, elements that are included, and elements that are missing within the scope of the report. It's totally natural that questions be a little broader than the contents of the report itself to well understand what the government intends.
I think that I would agree with Mr. Deschênes and Mr. Arnold. I think Mr. Small, but be careful how much you stray from your questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So these grounds that are now going to be used for a lot of them pretty much for the sole purpose of producing offshore wind energy, supported livelihoods and produced seafood for nearly 5 centuries. I'd like to ask Mr. Vigneault, what were the impacts to Canada's food security, to the future of Canada's food security, considered in the making of this report?
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. And if I can go back quickly to your previous question, yes, historical landing is something that will need to be discussed separately. It's on page 26 where we address that as a cap, and would like to remind everybody actually that this is not a science advice or a decision report. It is just a compendium of the information that was available at DFO to support the inputs of all the stakeholders, the government, into the decision process. So it never.
But Mr. Vigneault, your report was a very important part of it. So why was it not comprehensive with respect to historical landings and what the future could be for those fishing grounds and for Canada's food security? Why was that omitted?
Scientific methodological approach. For example, some of the stock that you mentioned, Atlantic cod on the Scotian shelf, we have no indication, no expectation that the stock will recover in the foreseeable future.
So, but your own scientists said in the early 2000s that northern cod in Newfoundland was commercially extinct and would remain commercially extinct. So why is there no expectation that environmental conditions could change? I mean, this is a very small snapshot in time that we're dealing with here. When we look at grounds that produced livelihoods and food for 5 centuries, so hopefully there's lots of history ahead for the fishing industry in Canada. So will you consider the future impacts of these wind farms on food security and livelihoods in Nova Scotia and Atlantic Canada and rest of Canada?
And we hope that the data that we provide put in the public domain will help that discussion. For cod on the Scotian shelf, we haven't seen any signs of growth or recovery or any environment signal that put further wide. In terms of food safety, the approach that we took in the report was to look at the actual landings in the last 10 years and to put forward in the report all the landings that have been recorded within the proposed offshore wind area, and also do a spatial analysis for those who.
Okay. So Mr. Vigneault, I'd like to examine the effects of the construction and operation of these wind farms on whales. What studies have been done in the effects to whale migration? What studies have been done on this for the construction phase?
So that hasn't been part of this report. What we've documented is the overlap of the whale with the proposed potential construction zone in the offshore areas that have been identified.
So
to look in annually to look at the details of the whale presence in these areas that will enable to feed into later stage of.
But
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you.
For 6 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Monsieur Vigneault, bienvenue au comité.
Mr. Vigneault, welcome to the committee.
As they look at offshore wind, and hopefully over time they will continue to consult with fishermen from one end of the province to the other, and of course include the other provinces that might be fishing in those areas. But that's not particularly why we're here today. It's the production order that was asked for on the report. So when was this report made publicly available for Canadians to see?
So this report was published in December of 2025. That was during the time frame of the open call for information from the Canada Nova Scotia Office of Energy Regulator. It actually posted publicly both on DFO website, but also as part of the record that the offshore regulator has published, including comments from fisheries stakeholders that were informed by the sharing of the data that we did through this technical report.
So December 2025 is before April 22nd, 2026, correct?
Yep.
Yep, because that's when the member for Central Newfoundland said the report wasn't public. So that contradicts what Mr. Small said.
That's my understanding.
Okay, so it was a report that has been available prior to that. In both the abstract and the conclusion of the report, it's noted that this report is meant to inform industry and the public about what is ecologically in these areas and what activities currently take place in the proposed wind energy areas. If someone was not aware of that, would it be safe to say they did not read the report?
That was the main intent. Basically, this is a step to contribute to the overall engagement effort, both by my colleagues in aquatic ecosystem and DFO, but mainly led by the regulator for those decisions to come.
Who ordered the report?
So the report was tasked to us by our colleagues at Aquatic Ecosystem. That's work that was undertaken in 2025 in anticipation of the call for information requests and the anticipation of the call for bid. I don't know if my colleagues from Maritimes regions have anything to add on that.
Yeah, the primary purpose was, as Bernard outlined, was to respond to the call for information. And it was also aquatic ecosystems within DFO identifying that there would be various information needs on the wind energy areas as the process for offshore wind advanced. So all this information was existing information and data and analysis was compiled in this report in anticipation of those needs.
And so the intention of the report was simply to provide a compendium of information that was already technically publicly available.
Yeah, that's a good description. Some of the analysis data were in very different sources within DFO, some more difficult to access, but it was all information that we already had at hand and that were put in the same report with a spatial analysis or regarding overlapping use, ecosystem, and the proposed area to inform the discussions.
In the work, I mean, we mentioned the 4 banks that are being looked at this particular point, which was Sydney Bight, Back Row, Middle Bank, Sable,
French
Bank. What information would you think in that paperwork would be pertinent to those who are making a decision, whether it be the province or fishing organizations that would be interested in what the decision making was?
So starting with the fishing industry, that gives us data, quantifying data analysis that would translate their recent use of the area in terms of landing fishing effort. As we discussed previously, it's not a perfect way to provide. There's the question of historical landing that was mentioned. Some fishing harvesters have different spatial footprints, so there's additional discussion, but it's a good start for the harvesters. It's also a good start to look at, for us, to look at the overlap with our own science survey, either the oceanographic monitoring and the fisheries science survey, which are very important for the sustainability of the fishing to maintain our capacity to advise. There's also information on the ecosystem that we haven't identified as sensitive in those areas, actual potential protected area. And we also make reference to a previously published, similarly in a technical report format for the use of the stakeholder of a more detailed spatial analysis on the potential overlap in use with different scenarios of offshore deployment.
And maybe a quick final question, and I think I got 30 seconds or so. Does the creation of this report say anything about the future of offshore wind in Canada?
No, as I mentioned, very important. This is not what we call a science advisory report. It's not a recommendation. It's meant to provide factual data information, and that's certainly true for this report. But that format, like what we call technical report, of those type of data that is useful, knowledge that is scientific knowledge that is useful, and needs to be made available to support further analysis, further inputs by a variety of stakeholders.
I now the Bloc Québécois. 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Bonjour à tous. Merci aux témoins d'être.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the witnesses. I'm happy to be here. Mr. Vigneault, who made the decision within MPO2 or DFO2 to produce this report? The way that we work, that our scientific reports work, is that we receive it's ecosystem management. We receive a request from them, and we decide whether we have the capacity and the information required. Then we produce the technical report. So who is part of economic or ecosystem management? Yes, Ms. Williams. So Ms. Williams, I have a question for you. I understand that if we look at the history, the Government of Canada, Natural Resources, designated 4 offshore wind areas or potential areas, and it was said that it was a key step in offshore wind production, and at the next stage, they said that there would be a call for information later this year. Now we're in 2020, and that was in 2025. So I understand that the call to stakeholders was made to provide comments on various subjects. And then, so you said, okay, well, for fisheries and oceans, we're going to prepare a report. So my question for you is, why in your report did you not evaluate the suitability of these sites? Why did you decide that the report would not evaluate the risk that offshore wind production would create for the marine ecosystem?
Thank you for the question. I think the answer to that is that we were really trying to provide information that was relevant in that time frame to the call for information. The intent of the study was to pull together information that the department already had, and it was not really a report to look at the risks of offshore wind via the fishing industry.
La demande qui est faite, là.
All right, so the request that was made by the government, by Canada Nova Scotia Offshore Energy Regulator, was to ask the industry and government and public and other stakeholders to provide feedback on various subjects. And so you at Fisheries and Oceans, you are required to prevent pollution, to protect fish stocks. And so we have the government here that's saying, okay, we want to set up wind power offshore. So I'm going to ask you a question again. Why did you limit the questions that you asked? Why did you not ask your people, for example, to describe species, the marine species, that's relevant, but also to look at whether there or not there was a risk for wind power for the marine ecosystem? Why did you not ask your people to answer that question?
Because DFO's role really is to provide information in these processes. We had a regional assessment that was done for offshore wind the year before last, and we provided data in that. We provided data that was already existing in this particular manuscript, and we are also expecting that there will be a call for information as a result of perhaps not an official call for information, but there will be information from Fisheries and Oceans provided into the impact assessment reviews as well. And so those impact assessments, as well as the regional assessment, tend to gather that information and look at those risks. Also want to add too that we at DFO promoted the call for information to the fishing industry so that the industry understood that it was happening and how they could get involved in that. We also provided funding.
Well, isn't that your responsibility to determine whether wind shore could have an effect on fisheries? You said that there was a regional report. What was in that report? What were the conclusions of that report?
No, my apologies. Thank you for the question. My apologies. I meant to say the regional assessment that was administered by the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Petroleum, Energy Regulator. That was a process that we provided data into the year before last, and then the call for information came out after that. So in both cases, DFO provided information, and mainly we focused on trying to identify areas of compatibility between what could be areas for offshore wind and fishing activity. The manuscript also went into information on species at risk, as well as landings data, as my colleague Bernard has mentioned.
I did read the report, Ms. Williams, and there's a good description of the species, but this is a crucial question. The setting up wind turbines offshore could pose a risk for marine species, but you deemed that it wasn't important to answer that question. Is that?
No, that's not the case. It's just that that was not the right time to answer that question. The impact assessments that are to come for these projects from the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, that will be an opportunity for an assessment of risk. And we will provide information at that process.
So the government said that they wanted to come up with a first call, but so you thought it wasn't necessary to answer that question right away.
Yeah, that was not the reason at that time to answer that question, because that will come during the impact assessment processes.
Merci.
Thank you. I now go to the second round. It's a 5-minute round, and I go to Mr. Arnold for the Conservatives. 5 minutes, please, Mel.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Vigneault, can you tell me if this report is pertaining to a project of DFO?
Yes, so this report was produced by our major project office, which has the task to, similar to that report, provide information in support of major project reviews.
Okay, is this a project, considered a project of the province of Nova Scotia or the government of Canada?
No, this is considered a project for DFO, for the government of Canada. The other project that we have ongoing that's related to this is we have a body of monitoring and research that's ongoing right now that has been funded by Natural Resources Canada, that's looking at addressing the gaps that have been identified in the regional assessment, to gather, as I mentioned earlier, additional information on whales, other species at risk, looking at...
Are you telling me that all of this research and report has been done not in response to any project that's being proposed? Is that correct?
This report has been done, as we alluded earlier, in response to the identification by the offshore regulator of the 4 areas. So it is DFO products looking at putting in the public domain the scientific information we have and the spatial information we have on the use for the use of stakeholder, our own use actually, when we look at the future details of the project proposal.
When does a project become a project for the proponent or for the government partners in this project?
I will turn to my colleagues in Maritimes region, especially in the context of the offshore wind development.
I mean, so after there's a call for bids and there's a successful bidder, there'll be there'll be a project-specific review. Some of the processes we spoke about earlier, there was a regional assessment led by the Impact Assessment Agency of Canada, and then NRCan and the province of Nova Scotia and the Canada-Nova Scotia Offshore Energy Regulator. They're still at the point where they're going to establish where exactly within the wind energy areas there'll be a call for bids. And when there's a successful...
So someone else has requested this information, and DFO has put their time, resources, and everything into it. Is there any transfer of funds from the requester for the information to DFO? Because we hear from stakeholders across this country about lacking resources within the department, and here is the department apparently chasing after ghosts requested by another department. Can you square that circle?
Yeah, so as we've outlined, the report does not contain. We didn't undertake any new analysis for the report, but some of what is in the report is an analysis of comparing suitability of areas for offshore wind with where fishing occurs. And that would have been under marine spatial planning funding that the department had at that time. And as the lead department for marine spatial planning, that analysis was undertaken. And then I'm not sure if my colleague from science has more to offer, but I believe NRCan is funding certain DFO science activities as well.
NRCan is funding the incremental data collection research that I've alluded to earlier. And we have received dedicated funding under the implementation of the Impact Assessment Act to do that work. So we're not displacing resource for other parts of the science sector to do this work. We have received incremental funding.
1 minute.
That helps answer my question. Okay, now we've heard that boundaries were moved for proposed marine protected conservation areas. When does the process for establishing a marine conservation area begin?
So again, I'll turn to my colleagues in the Maritimes region.
There's a site-specific process for a marine protected area or another spatial conservation tool. There's an area of interest is established. There's a lengthy consultation process with rights holders, stakeholders.
When does it begin? Who initiates the potential of a marine conservation area?
Well,
15 seconds.
Yeah, that's part of DFO's mandate to examine where are suitable areas or appropriate areas for marine protected areas.
Okay, I'll have more questions in my next round.
Thank you. And now I go to Mr. Morrissey for the Liberals. 5 minutes, please. Robert.
Thank you, Chair. My questions will be to Mr. Vino. Mr. Vino, first of all, some are trying to characterize this report as an approval by DFO of something that may occur. That is not the case. This is not DFO analyzing an area and saying it is acceptable for wind development, correct?
That's accurate.
Yes. So this was simply, as you indicated, a preparing documents to show correctly the species that inhabit this part of the ocean?
The species, the human use, the other spatial information like the existing or proposed protected areas.
So it's simply an inventory of what's going on?
Yes.
Yes. So to characterize it as somehow the government has given prior approval to a potential development would simply be false and spreading misinformation.
That's correct. Actually, the only decision that is appearing in the report is as context is the previous announcement of the 4 established areas. That's what the report is based on, is what DFO information has for those specific areas that had been announced in July of 2025 by Nova Scotia and the Government of Canada.
So again, so the resources that would have been used by the department to compile this information, it's simply, there's no new information here. It's just compiling information that exists and that you would be aware of, correct?
Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, we have a secure resource from Natural Resources Canada for new data collection. This is to feed into the future discussion on the impact assessment and project review.
Was new data collected during the scope
No,
of this report?
sorry, Madam Chair, for the confusion. No, it's separate totally
So it's just
this
compiling.
report. This report was what we had in our data holdings, in our spatial analysis that include the science data, but also the landings, the catch data from our colleagues at Fisheries Management, some data holdings from our colleagues at Aquatic Ecosystem Management as well. Okay,
thank you. Because I think through you, Madam Chair, it's very important for those following this that this is, as you state, there is no approval process. This is not a blanket approval to do any development in the subject area. Again, to clarify, it is simply a one source of information on species that exist in these areas, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Correct. And you did not provide any recommendations to any government on about suitability for any development or anything else?
No, there's no recommendation. The reports specify that we would need additional information analysis to make recommendation, and it would be a different process, a different format. It wouldn't be what we call a technical report like this one.
And so it's important because if somebody, the government of Nova Scotia, the provincial government, chooses to pursue an agenda of developing offshore wind, they would then have to go through a very rigorous process to get approval to do that, correct?
Yeah, if you want more information, my colleagues and my friends can provide that, but that's correct, and that's a process that led by the Canada Nova Scotia offshore energy regulator.
Thank you. I don't want to get into that, but there is a process to go through that's very transparent. It's very vigorous and going, and the interests of fishers will be taken into consideration if we get to that. Because at this stage, there's been no approval. There's been a concept that's been referred to by the government of Nova Scotia, and again, the department's role in producing this report, which is now 6 months old, or over 6 months old, is simply compiling information that would have been available.
That's my understanding as well. And yeah, as we state ourselves, further engagement of the fishing industry is important because the data we provide is just one way to look at the issue, and there's other considerations.
Thank you. So if a party was philosophically opposed to this type of development, green energy or wind energy, you would try to phrase it as a prior approval, which is not the case, as your testimony provided clearly. This was simple fact of compiling information that was within the department at the current time and makes no recommendation pro or against any potential wind development, correct?
I can't comment, Madam Chair, on the comment, but yeah, I can confirm that that report was factual, didn't have any recommendation.
Thank you.
Thank you. I now go to Ms. Deschen for 2 minutes et demi.
Beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Me. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Williams, do you think that it would be useful and relevant to check if wind power, offshore wind, could possibly have an effect on marine ecosystems?
Yes, I do think it's important to do that, and there will be opportunities for us to provide that information into the impact assessment process.
Impact. So from what I understand is that when the Minister of Natural Resources announced that he was designating these 4 zones offshore for wind, and this was done last July, and before this announcement, were you asked for your opinion, like would it be good for fishing off of Nova Scotia?
No, and we would not be giving our opinion. Our job at DFO is to provide information and data into the process.
Mais vous venez de dire que votre opinion.
Yeah, but you just said your opinion and the opinion of scientists as to whether there would be an effect on marine ecosystems would be relevant and pertinent.
I meant that in, my apologies, I meant that in the context of a risk assessment that would be done as part of the impact assessment process.
Mr. Vigneault, what is your knowledge on the impact that offshore wind power could have on marine ecosystems? It is a region that has been relatively well studied. We have given many data in the context of this study, and we have an international committee of sea exploration with Europe. And so our scientists work with their scientists because they have a lot of experience to understand what the ecosystem's effect might be. And so we have to take into account the basic systems in the marine species in the air. That we have to see these zones because these are quite dynamic zones. Lots of changes happen. It's very important for the ecosystem. We also have to have knowledge, specific knowledge as to where these offshore stations would be. Right now, it's just general zones that have been designated, but nothing specific. And we can see that inside these zones, there's a huge amount of difference in terms of biodiversity, depending on where. And so we need to have a specific location first, and then also the type of wind power that would be used. Are they floating? Are they anchored into the seafloor? And so there's information that has to come into the risk analysis in the future. But right now, we are still working, looking at species at risk, fish stocks, marine mammals. We are collecting information from sea and air to make sure we understand the basic conditions, and then we can do projections on the influence that wind power might have. For instance, well, thank you, Mr. Vigneault.
For 5 minutes, Mr. Kronitz.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'm very happy to be here today, and I want to thank you for having me at this meeting. I'm going to ask some questions from Mr. Vigneault, and if anyone else needs to answer them, I'd be grateful if you just jump in. The DFO report that we're looking at considers 4 wind energy areas off Nova Scotia where large wind farms could eventually be built. And am I correct that some of those areas overlap with existing or proposed marine protected areas? That's correct, right?
Yes, that's part of the document. There are partial overlap, and it's fully described in the report.
Thank you for that. And were the people who were doing this report aware of how a wind farm is built?
As alluded to in my previous answer to the member Deschaines, it is difficult to assess a priori the impact, and so without knowing the exact location or the.
But the question I was asking is do you have expertise within DFO around how an actual wind farm is built?
We don't have it, so.
Outside of the report?
No, it's not, with due respect, and I just ask you to stop the clock, because what we've had a number of discussions about what's in the report and what's not in the report and what the boundaries were, and I think it's perfectly relevant to ask what kind of expertise was around the table when people were considering what to include in the report or what not to include in the report.
Chair,
Okay,
point of order.
If that's your question, that's a valid one, but the earlier one didn't sound as if it was valid. Go ahead. Can you answer that question, Mr. Vigneault?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, no, the report doesn't address, or it's totally outside of scope, let's say the engineering aspect of wind farm. The goal of the report was to share what the expertise of DFO is, what the data, within the expertise we have, the data we have in our activities right now.
So are you saying that DFO has no expertise on how a wind farm is actually built?
That's not part of the mandate of
Chair,
DFO.
Chair, point of order. This is clearly outside the scope of what was requested.
I agree, Mr. Morrissey, that this is outside of the scope of the report. Obviously, it's very clear. The report is a compendium of existing data the DFO already had. This is not about assessing impact of wind farms. It's just
I wasn't asking
data.
about. I was not.
So there was no need for the people around the table to assess the impact. They shouldn't have that expertise.
The question,
you were collecting data that was already there.
I'm sorry, Madam Chair. I wasn't asking whether or not they assess the impact. I am asking about whether or not there was anyone in the room who knows how a wind farm is actually built.
But Chair,
be
on a point
relevant,
of
I'm
order,
sorry.
Chair, that's not relevant.
Move on, Ms. Please. I've stopped the clock, but let's move on to questions focusing mostly and solely on the report and
Okay.
its mandate.
When you were considering what data to include in the report, did you make decisions about what should be included in the report or what shouldn't be included in the report based on the geography that was under consideration?
Exactly. So it was based on the 4 areas that was identified. So we looked at what data sets, relevant information we had on the ecosystem fisheries. That's what brought in the.
And did you focus more on the ocean floor or the water or the surface?
It was all included. So there was information on the geology of the subsea surface. There was information on the biota. There was information on the water column. All the information that we have in our holding put in the document so that stakeholder can have access to that. And it's not meant to be the full data set. It's meant to be a place to start understanding what knowledge, information we have within DFO.
So that's where I wanted to get at is you've said over and over again that it's not intended to be the full data set. And so my question is did you take into account how a wind farm is actually built when you were trying to decide what you should put in that was part of that wasn't part of the full data set?
So, Madam Chair, I know that question was discussed, but it's not relevant to the scope of the report. The report, what is the fishing activity, the sensitive biological system, the geology within those geographic area, in the context of that those area has been identified as potential offshore, but there was no intent to look at the impacts of offshore, no intent to do
I'm
any
sorry,
analysis.
So I'm going to ask you to focus on the report, please.
The question isn't about the impact. The question is about when you chose, if you have 10 data sets and you're telling me that this report was the starting point, so that there was the possibility that you included in this report data sets 1 through 7 and number 9, but not 8 and 10. My question is did you take into account what might eventually be built there when you were deciding what to include and what not to include? And with due respect to the chair and to the members opposite, that is exactly relevant to this report.
No, it is not. I'm sorry, Ms.
So then
Burns.
if you chose...
My ruling is that it's not, so point of order is taken, and let's move on. Please focus your questions on the report.
So in terms of the things you didn't include, why didn't you include them?
So thank you, Madam Chair, for the question. It's a question of time to do the analysis and information that was already readily available elsewhere. For example, we listed the species at risk that we have documented in those areas, but there's other more details document like the recovery strategy for those species that are already readily available that are not all included in full details.
So are you saying that this report is incomplete?
As stated in the report, it is an overview of our main data sets with the intent of orienting anyone that's looking for information of what is in those proposed area. And there is other sets of information that could be available.
And
as well.
Thank you. The time is up. I now move on to for the Liberals, Monsieur D'Entremont. 5 minutes, please.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Let me go back to some of my questions. What was the department's intention in creating this report?
So I will turn to my colleagues at Aquatic Ecosystem Management that mandate us to do the report.
Perfect.
We were anticipating what the information needs would be on the department, anticipating what information regulators would need, and in some cases, those future regulators are people looking at fish and fish habitat as part of DFO or impacts under the Species at Risk Act as part of DFO, and then also other regulators. But the report is clear that we've provided the information that we had that we thought would be relevant and we thought that we would get requests for, but the information is not exhaustive. There's not everything that all regulators will need in the report.
Does the creation of this report say anything about the future of offshore wind in Canada?
No.
Since the report is for information and not actually about the process of creating offshore wind, would other steps, like maybe consultation with industry or, the province of Nova Scotia or other organizations, take place before future projects go forward?
Yes, and this report, as we mentioned, was responding to the call for information, and the fishing industry also responded to the same call. And the lead regulators on offshore wind and the offshore energy regulator have had discussions with the fishing industry, some of which DFO has facilitated or brought them together. But the fishing industry is speaking with the regulators, separate from DFO.
Who are the regulators?
Or the Canada Nova Scotia Offshore Energy Regulator.
Okay, and what connection does DFO have to that organization?
We do have an MOU where we provide data and information, and much of the analysis that is contained in this report we would have also provided to them.
Okay. What does this report make claims about the sustainability of these 4 areas for offshore wind projects? Or suitability, suitability of these 4 areas?
No.
Can you explain, and then finally, maybe, and I know I got a few more minutes here, but, can you explain what the peer review process is and what it means in the context of this report?
Peer review, I might turn back to my colleague from science. And if I could clarify, just in some of DFO's analysis on, say, where fishing occurs, we did look at what areas were suitable for offshore wind from an industry point of view, but that wasn't a DFO decision around what areas are suitable, but we did layer that on with where fishing occurs. But the data we provided was just where fishing occurs. Sorry to make that correction. I'll turn to my colleague from science.
No, and maybe I can continue there before I ask the last question again, is that, who identified these 4 areas? Because if I remember correctly, when the industry was, or when the province was looking at it, they were looking at far more than 4 different areas, but they did come down to maybe these 4. And I think that what helped prescribe the department in looking at these 4 or providing the data on these 4 banks.
Correct.
That decision stems from the regional assessment that was completed. DFO Science has provided input to that exercise. And for your earlier question on the peer review of this report, for technical report like that, we do a peer review, so it's internal to DFO, but there's other independent experts that have not draft the document that review, provide comments in terms of errors or for instance missing key data sets that they would propose to add.
Okay. In the future, I mean, if we're looking forward,
1 minute.
What would be the next step? Like if CNSOP, or the Canada Nova Scotia organization, I want to call it CNSOPB because for a long time that's what it was called, but it's now called, I think, WIND's in there too. If they make another request to the department, they will be providing, further study or further information as time goes on.
A next step for the science sector will be to share the data collected with the ongoing work to address the gap that have been identified by the regulator with the funding from Natural Resources Canada. Right. And I'll let my colleagues from Maritime Solutions speaks to the management side of the next steps.
We continue to provide them with data that will inform where exactly the call for bids will be.
Okay, and I don't.
We're now moving. Oh, sorry, Chris, you finished your time. Thank you. I'm going to go to the next round, and it starts with, for the Conservatives, Mr. Small. 5 minutes, please. Where is he not there?
He's online. Yep.
Oh, there he.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You took me by surprise. I thought that my Bloc colleague was to go after me. My question is to Mr. Vigneault again. Given that Emerald Bank, I know it's not included in this report, but it's a marine protected area, and parts of Sable Bank are to be protected. What features of the ocean floor are being protected on Sable Bank?
Small, I would ask you to stick to the report. It's very clear in the motion that led to this that you should stick to the report. So if they didn't do anything about Sable Bank, then we shouldn't be discussing it.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about transparency here. We've got emails from the department where reference is made to not using all of the information supplied by the fishing industry, and that might be uncomfortable. What would be so uncomfortable about providing all of the information that was supplied by the fishing industry into creating of this report?
Madam Chair, I'm not sure what the member is referring to. We have provided all the information we got on fisheries through our colleagues at Fisheries Management regarding the landings. Recognition that it's incomplete information as described earlier, and there is a need to continue to engage the.
So I'm referring to an email from Manon Casista de Raz, where she said, my concern is that so far we've only incorporated internal input, which may limit the completeness of the documents. They could be much stronger if the fishing industry were given an opportunity to review and provide feedback. I understand that my suggestion may be somewhat uncomfortable, but the fishing industry is uniquely positioned to offer valuable context and insights that may not fully capture internally. I just don't want us as DFO to miss the opportunity to give this fair consideration. So it's indicated in the internal documents that we've obtained that there were people involved in creating this report that held back information because they were uncomfortable. What do you have to say about that?
There's no reference to any LBAC. The email exchange refers to the process about further engaging the industry, and we science, and you made the point yourself, Member Small, saw the value of further engaging the industry. There's the Nova Scotia Fishing Alliance for Energy Engagement that have been kept abreast of this report, that are using this report as.
But the production.
They would perceive that it's just a part of the information and they have additional inputs to provide. My understanding, that wasn't the scope of this exercise. Again, it was the basic DFO information on the fisheries. My colleagues from Maritimes region could speak to the more broadly for the engagement process and the next step.
Well, okay, go ahead. Sorry, Mr. Galton.
So although it wasn't produced specifically for the report, an analysis of where fishing occurs, comparing it with what areas are suitable for offshore wind, it's called the Marks-An analysis with zones, is what it's referred to in the report. And there was extensive consultation with the fishing industry on that analysis. As my colleague mentioned, the Nova Scotia Fisheries Alliance for Energy Engagement was consulted on that analysis and had an opportunity to provide input. So
you've areas there that are already protected areas. Sable Bank is about to be protected. Why did you not have it in the report that areas that are now marine protected areas should remain protected areas, given what the fishing industry has sacrificed? Why are you not saying that protected areas are unsuitable for wind development?
The report does mention where existing marine protected areas and marine refuges are. The report also shows where the areas that are part of the draft conservation network. So as part of the call for information included in this report and also provided through other means to this process, DFO made it clear where existing protected areas are and where the areas that are under consideration are. And then a decision maker who, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. I now. No more questions from the Liberals?
Chair, well, no, I mean, we've covered all this report. Clearly, some others are looking for an agenda that doesn't exist here.
No questions from the Liberals. You pass on your round. Mr. Cormier?
No, Madam Chair.
No?
I don't think we pass our round, but we
Okay,
just
so we
have
will-
no more questions. So just keep the rounds of, the other party, but we don't have any more questions.
So I will go to Mr. Deschênes for 2 minutes et demi.
For 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a little surprised that the government of Canada designates zones,
Éolienne en mer au Canada.
designates areas to generate wind energy offshore in Canada. They mention zones or areas where they want to generate up to 5 gigawatts by 2030, and that they do it without having obtained scientific opinions beforehand so as to determine if there will be an impact on fisheries, which are an important activity in this sector. It's quite surprising. Now, what reassures me, Mr. Vigneault, is that you've assured us that you have collaborations with European scientists who have installed offshore wind, and you seem to say that it will depend on the individual projects. But should we not ask the question of whether there is an ecosystem effect, or are we asking the question, what is the scale of the effect on the environment, on marine habitats and species? Yes, there are necessarily effects. I mentioned our European colleagues, also our colleagues at Natural Resources Canada, who have expertise in wind energy engineering. And
Navigation.
certainly there are effects on use of these areas, on sailing, etc. And for us at the ministry, we carry out spatial analyses. Other effects, of course there will be effects. We cannot have infrastructure at sea that will potentially interact with the ocean floor, with currents, and with the wind by definition, without having an impact on the ecosystem. But the idea is modeling and quantifying the actual risk corresponding to these changes to the environment. And in the report, we see that species migrate to this region, and from this region, as an MP representing Gaspésie, it affects me directly. We're talking about mackerel and salmon migrating to and from this area. So I understand that in the analysis, there could be fish offshore Nova Scotia that end up in Quebec that could be impacted. Indeed, we are setting up a research project to evaluate the impact on migratory fish species. We'll be able to tag fish and follow their migrations with detection equipment. Also use environmental DNA to be able to estimate which species were present at what time in the proposed zones.
I think that now that we have one whole party in this study or in this committee no longer having any questions, I think we would have ended our round with Mr. Deschênes because we cannot continue rounds with just one party only. Pardon?
Point of order, Mr. Chair,
Yeah?
Madam Chair. We still have many questions.
I know. The round is supposed to be to Conservatives, Liberals, bloc, Conservatives, Liberals.
If the Liberals wish to concede their time, we will gladly take it.
Well,
but we don't want. We had 2 hours scheduled for this meeting because we had a series of rounds of questions that we planned to get through.
Well, it's going to be difficult to only have one piece of the committee working on and the other piece not playing. But then do we have quorum in terms of questions? That's my question. Do we have quorum in terms of questions if we only have one party not asking questions? Yes, we should, Don Tomas.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I'm just looking at the actual motion, and C says, pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the committee undertake 1 2-hour meeting with DFO to be held 1 week after the requested documentation is received by all members of the committee, and the scope of the meeting be on the report. And all I'm seeing at this point are questions about all the things that might not be in the report. So it was very clear that it should be on questioning the report. And I haven't seen many questions being on the report.
Mr. Arnold, do you have something to say?
Yes. I'll also go back to the motion that was actually there. And if you look at under B, subparagraph 1, it says all documents, including but not limited to memoranda, briefing notes, and internal communications related to the decision to produce this report, including any requests for its preparation and associated allocation of resources. I don't believe we've been provided with the document that provides the request. So the committee still hasn't received the documents that were required as per this motion.
Is that so, that the committee has not received the documents that the motion asked for?
If anybody can point out in the documents that we were received, the document that shows any request for its preparation, I'll gladly retract what I'm saying. So we have not received all documents requested.
I don't know. I'm asking the question of the committee.
The committee has received all the information it requested that's available.
Can you tell me which document shows the request for the study, for the report?
Let's take a timeout so we can get that.
I'm sorry, I wasn't here for this, so I'm just asking the committee to fill me in on what actually happened. Mr. Arnold is saying that, in fact, all the documents were not received, and you are saying, Mr. D'Entremont, that all the documents were received. May I ask the clerk? Pardon?
Report.
On the report.
It's been public for 8 months.
Paragraph B, subparagraph 1. All documents, including but not limited to memoranda, briefing notes, and internal communications related to the decision to produce this report, including any requests for its preparation and associated allocation of resources. Where are those documents?
I will suggest that I'm reading the motion in all its entirety, and it is requesting that. Mr. Arnold is saying that those documents were not received. Perhaps we can find out from the clerk and the analysts if those documents were received. It's a valid question to be asked.
Can we pause for a minute?
Okay, I'm going to suspend for a minute while we get some information here.
That's a great idea.
calling it back to order. The question that caused the suspension of the meeting was to check whether B1, which is all documents including but not limited to, was received by the committee. I will ask the clerk to say if that was so or not.
It would be up to the committee members to judge on the content, but under B1, as organized by DFO, they've numbered their responses and documents according to our motion numbering. There are 3 documents under B1.
Obviously, all documents were 3 documents. They were sent by DFO, and that is what the committee received. Mr.
Can we ask the clerk if any of those documents were titled the request for the report?
As requested under B1, I think that's all they got. And so that's what he's saying. You got 3 documents. But go ahead, Maxime, and answer the question.
Short answer is no. The titles are request for advice, planning notes, and planning notes.
So there was no request for the report, because that's what it says. All documents included but not limited to memoranda, briefing notes, and internal communications related to the decision to produce the report, including any requests for its preparation and associated allocation of resources. The last part, including any requests for its preparation. Was there a request for the preparation of the report included in the documents that were provided to this committee?
That was in the motion, that was requested, and what the committee received was what DFO sent, which is 3 documents. So the documents that were received was, I gathered, all that DFO sent to us. So that's it. You asked for the documents, you got 3. They may not be everything you wanted, but the bottom line is documents were received.
But when documents are ordered to be produced to the committee, someone else doesn't get to pick and choose which documents are provided. It was very specific in the motion which documents were to be provided. So who picked and chose which documents they would provide and decided to leave other documents out?
I think that DFO would have had to make the decision about whether they had any documents that they could send, such as requests for preparation and allocation of resources, and obviously they did not have that. Yes, Mr. D'Entremont?
Thank you, and I know those 3 documents that were sent. There's hundreds of pages of documents, so I mean, if we want to review them again, I suppose that's the prerogative, but I mean, there's a number of documents that were presented, and it might not be exactly what the Conservatives thought they were going to be getting, and it didn't fit their narrative, but it's the information, and the report or the request is pretty straightforward on reviewing the document that's before us. Even if we want to talk about offshore wind at some other juncture, you know, let's bring a motion forward on looking at offshore wind. That's not contained in this report.
I think you're making a good point. Mr. Arnold?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And through all of this debate, we could have fit in more question rounds and simply avoided this. I have simply 2 questions, and I want to know what data gaps were identified when they compiled the report, and how did they identify what those gaps were? If I'd had just a couple of minutes to ask those questions, we could have been past mine, and perhaps Mr. Small could have got his questions in as well, and we could have been finished.
Mr. Arnold, I think that I am getting a sense that nobody would deny you the right to ask your 1 question left in this round. So your question, Mr. Arnold. Sorry, Ms. Kunis.
So the issue I have is that the motion was to receive all documents, not some documents, all documents. I was repeatedly shut down for relevance. The document that I want to see, This is the document that asked for this report. And the reason I want to see it is because this report is effectively homework that has been delivered. I want to see what the assignment was, because that tells us what this report will be used for. And my questions related to what this report will be used for, and I wasn't allowed to ask them. And so the documents that we are missing are directly relevant and related to the questions that I was asking. And so I want to see, if this meeting wasn't supposed to happen. We were supposed to have 2 hours after we received all of the documents that we asked for. Not after we received some of the documents, after we received all of the documents. And so I want to have all of the documents. The committee is required to comply with its motions, and right now what we see is a situation where the motion has not been complied with.
I'm sorry, I have, whose hand was up? Mr. Morrissey and then Mr. Klassen.
Chair, clearly what we have here is one party that's disappointed they didn't find documents that would have suited their narrative, which the officials here explained quite clearly. This was not a report endorsing anything. It was a compilation of existing information within the ministry on a particular area of ocean in Canada. And to say full documents were not received, we're being told, or the department said, the committee has received all the pertinent information.
Mr. Klassen?
Yeah, just to expand on that, the committee and the department has submitted all the valid or not valid, all the information, relevant information to the requests of what this study was all about. There is no more information that was actually requested that was relevant to be submitted to the committee.
Ms. Cronus?
Section A of this motion, of the motion that led to the production of documents, requires that all, including but not limited to memoranda, briefing notes, internal communications related to the decision to produce this report, including any requests for its preparation and associated allocation of resources. We do not have the request for its preparation. And so there's no agenda here. The only thing I want is I want all of the documents. I want this committee to comply with the motion. And if someone, as my colleague said, if someone can show me where we have the request for its preparation and the associated allocations of resources from DFO, then I would be happy to withdraw my question. But this committee has not complied with its own motion. And we get into very dangerous territory in this place when we make motions and then we comply with them.
Chair, on a point
Thank you,
of order.
Ms. Cronus.
Chair, on a point of
Mr.
order.
Morrissey, yes, your name is down.
Chair,
I was going to ask a question, but go ahead.
Chair, you're the chair of today's meeting, and there's been an accusation made that this committee is not following proper mandate and that it's not proceeding with a motion that's adopted. I do not believe that that's the responsibility of a member to make.
The member has the floor. Please do not interrupt.
Thank you, Chair. Some of us sat through the whole committee process, Chair, and listened to what was going. We've been told ad nausea that the department provided all the information that was requested. Obviously, it doesn't suit the official opposition. This narrative that they're still looking for something that doesn't exist. But Chair, it's your call. You're chairing the meeting, and you make the decisions on procedure.
Thank you. I am trying very hard to do that, Mr. Morrissey. I'm trying to stick to procedure here and according to the book. So what I'm going to say, when you say all documents, and we still have Mr. Arnold, you still have your one question. Mr. Small, sorry.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I heard Mr. Morrissey accusing our side, the Conservatives, of having an agenda. We don't have an agenda here. This document production order was done on behalf of fishing industry stakeholders who feel threatened, who feel that their family livelihoods are on the line, that offshore wind is going to displace their livelihoods and push them off the fishing grounds, which they've continuously fished for generations. And I think that we should get to continue our questioning. Well, you can call it a point of order.
Peut-être pour faciliter les choses, Madame la juge, Madame la présidente.
Maybe to make things easier, Madam Chair, I'm looking in the documents that we have on the fishery, and I see one that says request for advice. So maybe our witnesses can advise us on the documents that they did produce. When I read that, I do see it, and maybe that would answer everybody's question here.
Thank you, Mr. Duchesne. In fact, my next suggestion that if you ask for all documents that the department had based on this specific section, B1, I'm going to ask DFO, did you send all documents that you had as outlined in B1? And you can't send something you don't have. Did you send everything that you did have?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, I can testify for the department that we have provided all the information that was requested in the motion. All the documents have been provided to the committee. The first document that Member Deschênes point to is the initial call for science advice that in the context of any major project is always very general. It gets the tasking, we put it that way, gets refined through discussion with our colleagues at Aquatic Ecosystem. In another document that was produced to the committee, number 3, that's the planning note, you'll see that the discussion focus on the compilation of data for the 4 areas as the report provide. I don't know if my colleagues from Maritimes region have anything to add in terms of the actual tasking.
Yeah.
Ms. Cronin, sorry. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, guys.
Right.
I didn't see you with your hands up there.
All
Now,
right.
who wants to answer that question first?
I can.
Go ahead.
I can just clarify that the meeting summaries that were included, my understanding is those are summaries of meetings where aquatic ecosystems within DFO was talking to science within DFO, and they determined that this report would be an appropriate thing to do. I'm the director responsible for the people from aquatic ecosystems, and I was aware that those discussions were taking place, and I was aware that the decision was made to produce the report, and the meeting summaries have been included where those discussions took place.
Thank you. Ms. Cronis?
So while we were on the break with my colleague, there was a document that we looked up online that was on the regulator's website that was not included in this package. And when I look at the document here, this request for advice that was included, it's very clear that that the terms of reference for this are there is a need for scientific advice to inform anticipated project-specific impact assessment, as well as science advice to inform more general knowledge gaps regarding potential. And so the questions I was asking around what kind of expertise DFO had is relevant to that, if that is the assignment. And I would like to continue with this meeting at a minimum. I would like the documents that we didn't get, but I would also, at a minimum, like to continue with this meeting and get a chance to ask my questions.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes, Mr. D'Entremont.
So this is off the regulator, from what we understand, not from DFO. So the regulator, but the motion is for the DFO report, not the regulator. If we want the regulator to come, well, then someone has to go back and come up with a motion and write the motion, and maybe we'll look at that at some other day.
Absolutely. I just want to finish with my list here. I have Mr. Arnold, and then I have Mr. Cormier. Mr. Arnold?
Thank you. And this really pertains to the point of order that was raised against Ms. Cronus asking questions about wind farms, and I'm seeing a CSAS review panel request, and I want to read off of part of it that says here, the development of an offshore wind industry in Atlantic Canada is likely to impact marine ecosystems and species in new ways that have not been investigated in a Canadian context. Consequently, there is a need for science advice to inform anticipated project-specific impact assessments. Specifically, wind farms were in this request that was provided to us. So Ms. Cronus's questions regarding the expertise of the department in wind farms was very much relevant, contrary to what the Liberal members were trying to propose here.
Mr. Cormier?
Madam Chair, look, we just heard that two officials said that all document was provided. What started that for the public watching at home is that we, the Liberal, didn't have any more question. We were giving, the opportunity to the Conservative and the Bloc to ask a question that they were willing to ask, okay? It's just us not having questions, so they will have had 2 more rounds of questions if we go with the normal round that we usually go into this committee in the second hour and the first hour. So there was no intention for us to not let them ask questions. It was just that we didn't have questions, so they can go on and ask questions. So we spent like 15 minutes on that with searching for document that doesn't exist, that everything was provided to the committee. So can we just go on, please?
Yes, Mr. Cormier, I think what I'm about to say is this. Whether there was on different websites, different things, the request, if you read the document, it asks for the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to provide the committee with certain documents. The department has told us that they provided us with all the documents they had. So whether other people on other websites had documents, we did not ask for those. We asked the Department of Fisheries and Oceans to provide the documents they had. They told us that they did. So as far as I'm concerned, that question is already put to rest. We have Mr. Arnold, who Mr. Deschênes had his round in this round. The Liberals said no. Mr. Deschênes had his round. Perhaps you, Mr. Arnold, can ask your question. Thank you.
Thank you. I have 2 questions, then I'll pass my time to Mr. Small so he can add it to the time that he should have. Mr. Vigneault, what data gaps did you identify when compiling this report?
So thank you, Madam Chair, for the report. The report wasn't specifically looking at the data gap. It was just sharing the information we have. The inputs we provide on the data gaps are on the regional assessment.
What data gaps did you identify?
Yeah, so the data gaps that we have identified are being addressed. That was the prioritization of the additional data collection that we're doing. So information on the fish stock and the use of those areas I've described earlier, like some of the migratory species. So we will be collecting additional information on that. Also additional information on the species at risk, in particular the marine mammals, including the North Atlantic right whale.
I'd like to make the motion that,
work on that
the data gaps that Mr. Vigneault just referred to be provided to this committee so that we can fully understand what might be at stake here, what and also the good work that the department may be doing in this process. And also as part of that, please provide in writing how were the data gaps identified?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, we can provide the gaps that I've identified and the ongoing science to address them.
Thank you, Mr. Vigneault. And Mr. Small, you have you finished, Mel?
I'll
Mr. Small?
pass the remaining my remaining time to Mr. Small to add to his 5 minutes.
Mr. Small, you have 2 minutes and 30 seconds. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Right whales were mentioned, I think it was 18 times in the documents that we have here. Mr. Vigneault, sorry. So right whales were mentioned, I think it was 18 times in the documents that we have. So, Mr. Vigneault, do you think the issue of right whales is adequately addressed in this report, given the conservation measures that fishermen throughout Atlantic Canada have undergone?
Excuse me, point of order.
It's not relevant to the motion. That we're...
Madam Chair, in this.
When I try to put on my listening, I'm being moved back to my speaker. You say, Mr. Morrissey, what's your point of order?
The member's questioning is not relevant to what this committee is studying, which is a report from the department that was submitted, which was a compilation of existing information that's been public for ad nausea.
Mr. Small?
Madam Chair, with all due respect, right whales were mentioned in the documents that we've had produced 18 times, and the impact on right whales of offshore wind development is very serious, and fishermen get blamed for the demise of right whales. So I think I'm asking Mr. Vigneault if he thinks that this matter was adequately addressed in this report.
The issue of right whales, I think you spoke to that earlier on about other species, but go to the question quickly because we're running out of time on this session.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to remind Member Small that risk or the impacts is not part of this report. It's out of scope. However, we have properly described all the information we have collected to date on North Atlantic right whale as part of the report. So the report is correct as part of the scope. We're doing additional work to make sure we understand where they are. I share the member concern regarding the continuing to support the successful effort in recovering that species. Whale strike from the increased traffic to the offshore is an example of potential impact. We need to know, to have detailed information on how they use the proposed area. That's work that's ongoing.
We have 1 minute and 30 seconds left. Mr. Small.
Thank you, Chair. Getting back to the marine protected areas that are identified, or the future marine protected areas that are being identified that are a part of the areas of these 4 areas, it's bewildering that areas are to be shut down or have been shut down to fishing where simply a baited hook for halibut haven't been allowed to make bottom contact. And there's nothing in this report that cautions against taking areas that were shut down for fishing to protect benthic habitat and whatnot are going to be allowed to be turned into offshore wind areas. Maybe Ms. Williams might be able to shed some light on why there wasn't something stronger in this report about that.
Before I say that, while I was not here for any of this discussion originally, I would say that I heard clearly from Mr. Vigneault many times that the issue here is this is a compilation of stuff that they already had, information they already had. Any new kind of analysis or research is obviously something to be done. So that's not meant to be in this report at all. But go ahead if you wanted to answer, Ms. Williams, quickly, and then I think you've got 4 seconds to answer.
Oh, thank you for the question. Yes, we did provide information on conservation areas that already are existing in the report. Thank you.
Okay, so now I think we have Mr. Gunn and then Mr. Dishon.
Chair, I'm going to yield my time to Ms. Cronus.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Mr. Vigneault, was this report prepared in response to science support for offshore wind activity in Nova Scotia, request ID 1753?
Madam Chair, yes. I must, as context, I must provide this is the initial request, and it doesn't reflect the full status of the discussion that has followed on what was the precise need of our client sector, in this case, aquatic ecosystem. It was a general request for advice, and as we alluded to earlier, in terms of providing science advice for the specific risk or for specific project location or technologies, that will be part of the future evaluation of the project proposals.
I understand that. The question I've got, though, is the issue requiring science information and or advice that was outlined in the document says that it specifically references the development of offshore wind industry in Atlantic Canada is likely to impact marine ecosystems and species in new ways that have not been investigated in a Canadian context. Consequently, there is a need for science advice to informed anticipated project-specific impact, as well as science advice to inform more general knowledge gaps regarding potential impacts of offshore wind development on aquatic ecosystems. So my question is, did you seek to understand how offshore wind works before you went to gather the data?
That was parallel effort, as I mentioned earlier. This was to share with all stakeholders the information we have in terms of data, current spatial analysis. At the same time, in parallel, we have a body of research to address the gap that we have identified. Yes, this is a new industry. That this will have impact on the ocean environment, on our aquatic resources that we haven't seen before. So there's research ongoing that includes better documenting the environment, the resource before development, and also there's modeling component where through the use of oceanographic model and ecosystem model, try to see what will be the impact of different types of structure construction, for example.
In deciding what to include in this report and what not to include in this report, did you think about the infrastructure that would be required at all?
Not specifically for this report, because it was, let's say, the state of the environment or the state of the fishery. This would necessarily be required for future steps of the reviews in when we'll get actual detailed proposal. I don't know if my colleagues from Maritimes region can add to that.
If I could add, the regional assessment process that was led by the Impact Agency of Canada, that regional assessment process and their report would have informed the types of information that DFO was anticipating would be needed, and then that would have informed what we decided to include in this report.
Given the way the ocean works, is it fair to say that when you have a geographic area, that the fish are generally unaware of the boundaries of that?
I mean, there's a
current.
So, did you think about the fact that that the people doing this assessment might actually need information from outside of the area, given the impact that offshore wind has outside of the immediate location that it's located?
Absolutely. This is part of the report. In many of the analysis, we talk about the adjacent areas, the adjacent information on fisheries, on fish stocks, and so on.
When it comes to a report like this, is the precautionary principle relevant at all? Do you think in any way about what the impact do you think anything about the precautionary principle and the mandate of DFO?
It's not relevant in the sense that it's not a decision document. We don't make recommendation. We don't make a management decision. It's a state of the information that we have. The precautionary approach will come next into the regulatory decision.
So what use is this document to anyone who's doing impact work?
I can describe the use for ourselves as an example. Like, we are concerned. We mentioned the very important concern of the fish harvester. We are also concerned about the viability of our science survey for fish stock long term. So this was an exercise that compiled all the information on where we have our own survey, but a survey that we conduct in collaboration with the industry that overlap with those areas where there's a potential for a conflict in terms of usage of space, where either we won't have access to the area to do the survey work because of the infrastructure, or there would be indirect impact, like if there's impact on the oceanography, so that will change the signal that we're measuring. So as an example.
But none of that's included in this report.
Liz, thank you. The time is up. On them is Monsieur Deschênes. 2 minutes de demi.
2 minutes. Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I've had the opportunity to read the documents that were provided, and I must say there are things that concern me. Mrs. Williams, you had a meeting in May of 2025, and Natural Resources Canada wanted to communicate with the DFO about compensation for fisheries in order to predict the effects, the potential effects. And in your notes, it says that the protection of fish and its habitat will look at the repercussions on fish and its habitat while applying Article 34 lens to the fish management, Article 34 on the Fisheries Act, which talks about the protection of fish and its habitat. And then we see the request for advice that was asked for, and it was clear that it was necessary to get scientific advice to orient the potential impacts of the project. So when I see what was done, that was back last year in May. So I really don't understand that this report that you're tabling here in December is voluntarily limiting itself and doesn't want to look at the impacts that the industry, the wind industry, could have. Explain it to me. Were you approached politically to be asked to reduce certain aspects of the report?
Thank you for the question. No, we were not approached politically. We were really responding to the call for information that concluded in January of this year. I would say that the fisheries compensation is something that is ongoing, and we are engaged in discussions with colleague departments on that. And so I think what I would say is that there's more information that DFO continues to provide as this process moves along. And so the report that we are discussing here today is not really the complete series of information that we will be providing going forward.
Vous êtes rendu un peu plus loin que ce que
But it feels to me as though you're actually a little further on compared to what is contained in this report, especially when it comes to the impact on marine ecosystems.
I have no response to that. I'm not quite sure what you're getting at with that question. Could you maybe give me a bit more context?
Well, what I could add, and I was trying to explain a little while ago, when we give scientific advice on big projects like this, there are needs. When those needs are going to happen, we don't know this. So you're referring to the first document. It's just a document to look at or keep an open file and to consider all of the scientific advice that will be needed in time to evaluate the project. And when it comes to this request for information, and this was just a request for information, it wasn't a request to look at the impact, to look at things. If you have data that if you have relevant data to the future decision of the zone within this area that in the 4 big zones that were identified, do you have any previous, other, please give it to the regulator. This is what was asked. So that first document is that it's basically an open book. It's an open file for the future, and so that we can collaborate with all of our colleagues at Aquatic Systems.
I want to thank the witnesses for their discussion of this report. It was a very interesting discussion, to say the least. So thank you for being here, and thank you all. So I'm going to now adjourn this so we can move to the in-camera component of our meeting, which is the Fisheries Act. Okay, good. you.